Now, another thing, a real easy fix for if people are having voice-to-skull technology used on them, what we found is that if you put an iPod, put ear plugs in your ears and use an iPod at a pretty moderate volume, you will override both the air conduction and the bone conduction of the hearing system. And that will oftentimes block out a lot of the voice-to-skull or the ELF wave-generated sound that is used for audio harassment. That's the voices around you. There's two distinct different ways people hear voices, and that is in the head, which is voice-to-skull, and voices in vibrations around them. And a lot of times people will say, well, I know they're tracking me from room to room in my house because I'll hear them talking to me through a ceiling fan in my bedroom, and then I'll hear them talking through my refrigerator compressor vibrating in the kitchen. Well, what that is ELF wave-generated sound. They basically cover your entire home with this broadcast or this transmission, but it needs a vibratory source, something that slightly moves air to finish amplifying it just enough for you to sense. And it seems like they're actually following you from room to room with it, but it's really just being amplified by whatever's vibrating or whatever's moving air in the room you may go to. And if you use an iPod, you can usually block out both of those with an iPod turned up. What they want you to do is focus, and focusing on listening to them brings it in clearer and clearer until I know a lot of the victims will say, well, I'm trying to focus on what they're telling me to get clues or to get hints at who they are or what exactly they're doing. And the more you focus on it, the more inescapable it gets. So the techniques that we're really working on are ways to ignore it. And that really pisses them off. These people have created their own prison as well. They're sitting in a room, 12-hour shifts, behind a computer, watching you. The first couple of years, it may be a little bit fun. After a decade, it's a job like any other job. And and if you learn to ignore them, that's one of the best ways of getting back at them, because they know they've created their own prison when they get into doing this kind of work.
Well, there's also, from what I understand, there's I don't know if it's just in the United States, but there's a certain frequency that things like fans and I don't even understand it, but maybe you know what I'm talking about, that go at a certain frequency, whereas in Europe they use a different frequency. It has to do with the electrical current or whatever it is. And apparently the one in America is not compatible with our natural physiology. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I have heard a little bit about that. I know your natural frequency is between 7.8 and 8. And that's another, actually it's funny you brought that up, because another way of actually scrambling what they pick up from your remote neural monitoring, there's a company called Kelly Research Industries, if you don't mind me plugging somebody, because it's one of the few places I know where to get these. But
no
they make a ELF wave generator that generates a room full of ELF waves at that frequency. It matches your normal EEG frequencies, or your natural rhythms, your natural frequencies. And you'll still hear the voice to skull, but it interrupts what they're able to pick up remotely from you, especially if you have any loud music or a TV or anything else going on in the room. What they pick up will be piggybacked on all the superficial ELF waves that are being created in the room by this device. So, I mean, it's another way just to mess with them back. I guess it's really not helping you not hear anything or helping you not be attacked by something, but at least you know you're kind of sticking it to the guys that are doing it to you by making them listen to a lot of ambient sound in your house rather than just what's coming out of your head.
Yeah, and someone else is actually, I have people that are Skyping me during this. They may not be calling in, but they're actually sending me Skype messages. And one of the people is saying that, that there can be a signal, which is sort of a sleepiness that one's being put under, and that the minute you detect that, to do a countermeasure to that and understand that, that's sort of a certain detection, sudden tiredness or sleepiness.
Well, and most people that get that, the signal that at least they may be alluding to this, is kind of a loud crack. That's what most people describe perceiving, and as just as they're falling asleep, and sometimes it'll bring them back out of a sleep, is they'll hear a pop in their head or a sound like two stones being clacked together. And sometimes it's loud enough that it will bring you back out of your sleep. But usually it's heard just as they're actually sedating you or making you more somnolent, which can be done with this technology as well.
Yeah. Now, one thing I'm wondering, are you familiar, do you know who Dr. Fred Bell is?
I've looked at his research, and I've heard some of his interviews, and it seems like he's very knowledgeable about this topic. And I've actually been meaning to try to get a hold of him, because one of the things that we've talked about through Freedom from Covert Surveillance and Harassment is creating a summit of getting all of us that are doing research into this and publishing things down different avenues, get us all in one room to try to come up with a plan on how to really get this into a congressional hearing. And another thing is to get some criteria for distinguishing between attack and true mental illness. Because that's, from a medical point of view, there are mental illnesses that do cause you to hear voices and do cause delusions and hallucinations. And because this technology is meant to mimic those diseases or illnesses, sometimes it's hard to tell.
Yeah, I'm sure it's getting really, really confusing. Although I have to, I sort of am beginning to think that there's no such thing as mental illness so much as people that have been targeted in more than one way. But that's because I'm also believing in, obviously ETs or beings from other realities and so on, and entities that are discarnate and et cetera, et cetera. So, it gets really, really involved. And now humans are doing it to other humans, and so we've got big troubles, obviously.
Well, and I'll be the first to tell you, I have no love for psychiatry myself, mainly because it's so subjective. When I put somebody to sleep, I check your lab values. There are criteria that I have to go by to dose you with a certain dosage of an anesthetic or with a drug. With psychiatry, you're basically telling somebody your story, and if it sounds reasonable and believable to them, you're okay. If it seems a little outlandish, you're mentally ill. And, and it's just, it makes no sense.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. And I studied this in college, and I just came away thinking, boy, these are people out there basically kind of playing God and determining what's normal. And actually, we're beginning. Again, the more you go into this rabbit hole, normal becomes, almost an oxymoron.
Well, I even had have a good friend who's a psychiatrist, and one of the few psychiatrists that I like. And he even told me, he said, well, when you really, break it down, everybody's got something wrong with them. We all got something wrong with us. So basically, the mental illness is the norm, possibly,
Yeah, that's true, too. Now, I'm getting some more information coming through to me here. I'm just going to run this by you. I'm hearing that the U.S. is on a 60 cycle frequency that contains an imposed Lily wave frequency, and Lily wave was first observed artificially imposed on the U.S. electric system in the early 70s. It got its name from the shape of the lily flower on the oscilloscope. Does any of that make sense to you?
Yeah, I've heard a little bit about that, but I haven't really dove into it. I'll be honest, I'm nobody's physicist.
Right.
I really was kind of more focused on the medical end of things and protection from that. But I know there are, like in my book, I wrote based on what I've witnessed and what I've been able to talk to verifiable sources about this coming from satellite. But there are people who say some of this can be done through your home wiring. HARP is another agent that, like Nick Begich, Angels Don't Play This HARP, in his book.
Absolutely.
He talks about it being done with HARP. And in